companies like Pornhub and X videos, do you think any of them would keep the morality for a second, or do you think they would immediately, I think they would immediately ditch the morality and start producing some of the most vile content known to man? Do you think there's a problem with like libertarians like not making their ideas palatable for most Americans, as if like staying on the extremes when it comes to like the party platform they put forward? There was a lot of hubbub recently because there was a candidate that during one of the debates, he was actually able to get on the debate stage with the other candidates, which is a big accomplishment for a Libertarian Party because they're usually kept out of most debate stage. And
right.
During the debate, he started talking about the age of consent. And so for a lot of Americans watching that, it's like, you got your shot, and then immediately you fumble it. Why the fuck are you on my TV? Get off.
Yeah. There are a lot of subjects that people don't want to have rational conversations about. And that one is even worse than abortion, right? Because most people who are talking about abortion, they're not even having a rational conversation. They're arguing their feelings, or they're arguing their religion. And so there's like, it kind of like kills the rational conversation. Now, at least most of the country is already involved in the debate conversation to one degree or another. So
Wait, can I just quickly, when you say rational conversation, do you think there's like a rational conversation to be had around that?
Sure.
And to what degree, and like on what angle?
Oh, okay, so let me ask you this: is age of consent the same in every single state in the country right now?
No, it is not.
Okay, so does that mean some states maybe need to be higher or lower?
Yeah, I would say higher. Yeah.
Okay, so and how high?
I think 18 is a decent.
Why 18? Why that number?
I think it would need to be either 18 or up to 25, and 25 would be the line because of the end of either like brain development. And I think 18 is fine because it feels like most of like the body maturity and mental maturity has, like, you've gone through the majority of that process by that point. But when you're talking about ages like 14,
you brought science into this.
Yeah, that was
which is great. Like, because a lot of people, they won't have that. They'll just say 17, that's disgusting, even though that might be legal in some states already. So this is another issue where, like, some people, they're just going to get, and then some people, if you were to say it's 25 to some people, they'll be like, that's outrageous. What's wrong with you? So like, and 18, a lot of people are comfortable with 18 because 18 is just the number that's always been there, right? It's 18 to sign a contract. It's 18 to buy a car. All these other things. It's 18 to vote, 18 to join the military, more or less. Like, that's just a magic number that's, nobody knows where that came from. Nobody knows. I think it's awesome that you brought up 25, because that's a real number that people say 25 is when your brain development is complete. Most people don't know that. And so like I said, like, there is a rational conversation to be had about this. And maybe it doesn't need to change at all. Maybe things are fine. Maybe it does need to change. But, like, yeah, you can't just throw it out there into an audience who's, like, completely unprepared for it and can't even have a rational conversation about, whether or not they should wear a mask on their face.
I think when it comes to the age of consent, it's like hearing that come out of a libertarian mouth is almost like hearing, like, it's hearing the worst word possible. It's like you immediately falling to a stereotype, right? Yeah. Like, immediately the libertarian's going to gain power and then they're going to abolish the age of consent. Is like the idea that people have of libertarians in their head, that they're and so that's what I think a lot of people have that reaction, where I assume you're probably either wanted to stay 18 or, like, go higher, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I look at it and I'm like, I don't know. I don't put too much thought into it, I guess. Like, there's, I don't know. But it's something that people just bring up because they think, like, oh, I'm going to be dramatic and, like, I'm going to start this big conversation and, like, I'm going to say it and the whole world's going to hear me and they're going to think it's great. And it's like, no, they're going to think you're a pedophile. And, like, they're going to assume that the only reason you're bringing it up is because, you're 40 years old and you want to have sex with a 16-year-old. Like, that's what people are going to assume. And it's like, yeah, that's not the conversation that you're trying to have. Like, and you can't squeeze that into a soundbite, which you're actually trying to say. So, like, so just, yeah, like, and I don't want to say, like, let's stick to the topics that have been chosen for us. Like, oh, we can only talk about COVID and this other stuff. But, like, people are really difficult with having conversations. Like, people in general are very reactionary to everything that they see and hear. And so, and especially, and it's not always just their fault. It's not that they're stupid, but it's that everybody has a slightly different language too, right? Everybody has different trigger words. Everybody has different, issues that are important to them. Things like that. And if you say something like that to somebody who's got like a daughter, and let's say they have a daughter who's like 14 or 15, like the thing that's probably going to pop up into some parent's head is going to be like, oh, this weird creep is like after my kids.
Yeah.
Like they don't take into consideration the fact of how many different people they're talking to and how their words are going to be received. So, and it's like, nobody wants to have that conversation right now because there's not like sure, we could probably find some situations to point out where an age of consent law was misapplied or something. But it's like that's not a major issue that the country needs to worry about right now. So why are you even going? Like, there's honestly, literally people being thrown in prison.
All of the legislation that I could think of crafting to make it so we deal with the edge cases. For example, Romeo and Juliet laws, I feel like cover all the bases for me personally. Because for me, the only thing I could ever imagine is like 18-year-old, 17-year-old. Because obviously, like, they're in the same class. It'd be ridiculous. I remember being 18 and my girlfriend at the time being 17. We were in the same class. I mean, it's not like we were doing anything. Like that, I feels like it covers all the bases.
You have your birthday and it's like you're one day older.
For me, it feels like everything's covered. For me, it feels like we've got basically this settled. Like, we're never ever going to create the perfect to the date. Like, this is the exact second where you become an adult. Eventually, you have to draw an arbitrary line when it comes to some of these things. I just don't understand what the obsession is. I don't understand what the obsession is. Like, why was that even on the debate stage?
Well, I think a lot of people are like, they look at it like, well, why is the arbitrary line here? Why, so it's okay if you're a year apart, but not a year and a day. Like, why, it's the same thing with the alcohol thing. Like, it's really like, why are there these arbitrary numbers, which is a completely separate, conversation that we can have. But the assumption is if you're going to challenge that system, it's that because you think there's like this big, no, there's all these people you can't marry because you're too old for them and you're upset and something like that's what the assumption is. And the assumption is like, no, there's who cares if, here's an example, right? You have to be 21 to get into a bar to drink alcohol, right? Like, should we change that? Should we make it 20? Some people say it should be 18 because, at 18, you can go
get shot at for 18. It's kind of like you can't have a Budweiser, right?
Exactly. But it's like, wait a minute, maybe we should raise the age to join the military up to 21 instead. Like, where do these numbers come from? They're just numbers that somebody made up and they stuck. And I think that's the real issue that people are like, where did these numbers come from? Let's question the society that we live in.
Age of Consent is the most vitriolic example you could possibly use.
Exactly. It's like the worst one you could choose. But, but all the same things come up, right? Well, I turn 21 tomorrow. Like, there's always this when we were all turning 21, it was like this joke that like, okay, we're going to go to the bar and like, we're going to hang out outside. And as soon as it's midnight and you're officially 21, then we're going to go inside. And it's like, if you think about it, how stupid is that?
Nothing changed really nothing changed between 11:58 and 12. Nothing changed in those 2-minute time period that elapsed that made you an adult. But society has to, for I guess the good of the pack, draw a line somewhere. And like, let me ask you, do you think 18 is an arbitrary line that should be gotten away with? Do you think it should be moved up? Like, what? Like, because if we both acknowledge that to some extent this is an arbitrary line, like, do we just keep it and say the issue's settled? Because that's what I fully believe about it. I think like this issue's settled. I don't think there's really many ways to improve this. I feel like the Romeo and Juliet law is the only legislation I could imagine that I could craft to make this a better issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's so this is the thing, right? And like, you can make this argument for like a lot of things. Okay. If you were to just get rid of that today, like, there would be a lot of problems. Like, you would have like 40-year-olds who are like, oh yeah, I can have sex with a 10-year-old because it's legal now. Like, yeah, like that would be the mentality, and like that's a really scary thought. And that's not.
Can you think what these companies like Pornhub and Xvideos? Do you think any of them would keep the morality for a second, or do you think they would immediately? I think they would immediately ditch the morality and start producing some of the most vile content known to man and releasing it for the public consumption. And that not only is going to affect the people who are being filmed there, but that's also going to affect the children who ultimately will access this type of pornography because They do. That's just how the 18. Are you sure you're 18 never works. They just click yes every time.
Right.
It's gonna affect how they think sexual development is supposed to be supposed to go. Porn has a massive impact on sexual development of young people in this country. There's just the amount of damage that would be done if we got rid of these laws would be astronomical.
Absolutely. But so the question is, like, and this is like with all crime, right? Like you don't have to like even go here. Like you can deal with not even crime necessarily. Let's talk about Social Security, right? A lot of libertarians are against Social Security because it's a Ponzi scheme and all these other problems. The problem is, if you eliminate Social Security like right now in one fell swoop, there are going to be a lot of people who are just like thrown in the gutter, right? There are people who they have no savings outside of that. They depend on that. That barely gets them by alone. And now they're going to have absolutely nothing. And so a libertarian, generally a libertarian would propose, let's just get rid of the system with absolutely no consideration for, okay, but what do we do with all the people that are going to be negatively impacted with this? And I think it's the same with, whether it's an age of consent law, whether it's an alcohol law, whether it's like a drunk driving law, you're still going to have problems. And the assumption is, well, we'll find a way to deal with them. And it's like, okay, well, why not find a way to deal with them first and make an alternate proposal of how you figure
you need to replace the system, because if you just destroy the system, people are going to fall through the cracks, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that there's no longer a system in place. I have the same discussion all the time with NATO, where, like, personally, I think that Europe needs a self-defense agreement, because they're such small states that could be aggressed upon by bigger states. It only makes sense for them to like unite together. And so I have the argument with people like, I think NATO should exist, but that's only until there's a better system that somebody could propose me, because there's a ton of problems with NATO as well. It's like, until you have a better system to replace the current one, you have to go with the current system. What was it Winston Churchill said? Like democracy is a terrible system, but it's like the best one we got. He said something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's, what do I want to say about this? So I consider myself an anarchist to some degree, but I'll even have conversations with anarchists who will say,
do you think ANCAPs are anarchist?
Yeah, I think they're, well, it's everyone's got their own interpretation of what the words mean.
That's why I'm asking you, because I don't care, because I'm not an anarchist. I think I think there needs to be authority of the state. So obviously, like, I'm not an anarchist.
So let me say this, because this is where I butt heads with anarchists, right? Because what they'll say is, we just need to get rid of the government. Like, that's it. It shouldn't exist, right? But I like to come in and say, okay, but you don't like the government because it violates people's rights. If people want to have a government, if they want to submit themselves or subject themselves to a government, and you're forcibly taking that away from them, aren't you then violating their rights?
I mean, these governments exist to some degree to the consent of the governed. I mean, that's the whole idea of the social contract.
Right, but then the argument is that, yeah, but that never works. It's always, we don't give consent, and then, we're being forced to be governed anyways. So, but to an anarchist, that's like, no, you just have to get rid of it. And it's like, if you replaced every institution of the government with something, and it was like completely voluntary, it did everything, and there was police, there was fire, it was all voluntary, nobody was getting taxed or robbed at gunpoint or anything else. If you showed that system to an anarchist, they would usually say, yeah, but that's not government. It's like, who cares what you call it, right? If somebody likes government and they have everything that they want and they have a way to pay for it, and they're not stealing from anybody and they're not violating anybody's rights, why don't you want them to have that? And it's like, well, they can have that, but they just can't call it a government. It's like, why can't they call it a government? Like, aren't you violating their rights by telling them what they have to call it now? So, like, there's everybody thinks that there's like some, like, we'll create the system and there's going to be these rules and that's going to be the end of it. And it's like, you can't. Like, human nature is too complicated. We're not machines that work on like 8-bit binary or anything like that. And so you can't have these complex systems that involve billions of people without having some sort of organization between us. But what we should do is do whatever we possibly can to avoid coercion and force, which is basically violating somebody's right to choose not to be a part of something. that's ultimately like kind of where I draw my line is, you know, is everybody consenting to this? Is everybody participating voluntarily? Or is somebody being forced to participate because, you know, maybe they're capable of doing something that everybody else wants to take advantage of, and this person just wants to be left alone?